8 years ago, Clara's fingers held sway over my future. I can still recall her meticulous grip on a pen, hinting that every action she undertook held significance. It was this intensity that initially captivated me, not her beauty, though she possessed it in a refined, strategic manner. Her ambition infused each utterance as if she'd already planned the subsequent decade of our lives. Intrigued by this vision, I yearned to inhabit it. The wedding date had just been set for October 14th, a fall ceremony being her preferred season, characterized by leaves and warm hues. A small service was followed by a rooftop reception under twinkling lights and heartfelt speeches. Our playlist was partially assembled, oscillating between indie love songs and soul classics. That evening, we were sharing laughter over cake samples when I noticed her fixing her gaze on Marcus from across the room. Yet, I paid it no mind. After all, he had been my best friend since college. We endured mutual trials such as bankrupt startups, overdue rent, and impoverished bank accounts. He was my brother in all aspects that truly mattered. And Clara, I believed her to be the woman I would marry. In hindsight, there were indicators. The recurrent dinners between them, supposedly for brainstorming, yet held without me. Marcus' growing fascination with wearables, despite his minimal smartwatch usage, which was closely related to Clara's area of expertise. She began using "we" when discussing her company's next phase, even when I had no part in it. However, at that time, engrossed in a product launch for my logistics client, I was so blinded by trust that I failed to scrutinize the details. I recall Marcus' toast at our engagement planning dinner. To the future Mrs. Adler, he had said, with a grin that captivated both women and investors, "May your startup always outpace your love life." Laughter ensued, even from me. I failed to recognize it as a veiled warning, cloaked in charm. One evening, we were seated on our apartment balcony. Beneath us, the city was abuzz, and she leaned comfortably against my shoulder, discussing IPO tactics and socially responsible investing. I recall feeling an intense swell of pride, grateful to be hers. "We'll be the admired power couple," she declared. "No one will challenge us." I agreed. "Invincible," was my response. I was unaware that she had another scheme in motion. Betrayal isn't always like a thief sneaking in under cover of night. Sometimes it arrives with a briefcase and your closest friend's cologne. They say betrayal stings the most when it comes from those you share meals with. That pain struck me the day I walked into Clara's office with lunch, her favorite chicken foil from that little eatery in Midtown. Her assistant stood frozen at the door. "She's, in a meeting," she said hurriedly. I waited. 20 minutes later, Clara emerged with Marcus. She appeared taken aback at my arrival, as if she had forgotten I existed. "Ah," she murmured, "you didn't contact me." Marcus simply flashed his usual grin, clapped me on the back, and said, "Adler, punctuality suits you. Always a charm." I attributed it to discomfort. The kiss she bestowed was gentle yet distant. However, I reciprocated. It wasn't some spectacle of a scene where doors banged or confrontations erupted that marked the beginning of our unraveling. Instead, it came gradually. Her closing her laptop in my presence became more frequent. Marcus started missing our weekly poker nights. Clara's working late stretches extended to entire weekends. I continued preparing dinner, waiting for her up, and playing the part of the devoted believer. Until one night, I entered our home, and half of her wardrobe was empty. Her ring was no longer beside the sink in its usual spot. No message, no call, only emptiness. No trace of her remained. A silence permeated every room, a deafening echo of her absence. Marcus ignored my calls for 2 days. On what was meant to be our engagement dinner's morning, my phone notified me with a LinkedIn post. Clara had shared a picture with Marcus, their arms linked, at a tech event. Her caption read, "When ambition intertwines and affection ensues." Power couple off the air. The post was flooded with congratulations and emoticons of love and fire. I struggled to believe what I saw on the screen, but it was indeed true. I didn't respond, didn't comment. Instead, I shut off my phone, exited our shared apartment, and stood motionless on the sidewalk for what seemed like eternity. Somewhere between shock and anger, I felt another sensation, a detachment. as if a tie had been severed. I was not just heartbroken, I was adrift. Yet, even then, with Clara's hands still symbolically shaping my future, I remained silent. I didn't swear at her or pursue them through social media. Instead, I chose to walk through the city, moving past spots laden with shared memories, our beloved bookstore, the park where we pretended time was on our side, the coffee shop that bore witness to her first kiss on a rainy afternoon. I walked, pushing the pain into numbness, letting go of her grasp. Home, now devoid of her presence, I began packing not hers but mine. The lease she'd forgotten I held, the landlord contacted, and our shared living arrangement ended. I left behind the jointly purchased couch, her mother's cutlery set, pictures adorning the refrigerator. Everything was abandoned. Whatever future Clara envisioned, it was hers. Mine would be separate. That night, a one-way ticket to the coast was booked, no plan needed. Staying meant lingering in ruins. I didn't want to be that man, dwelling in what was lost. If Clara and Marcus sought headlines, let them have them. I opted out of their narrative. It was time for me to embark on my own endeavor, and to do so, I required distance, freshness, and an untainted commencement devoid of weddings, speeches, or social media tags. What I desired was tranquility and room to create a genuine future, one she could no longer encroach upon. It began subtly, so subtly that I now feel ridiculous for not picking up on it sooner. An overlooked text message, a last-minute conference, Clara saying, "Time slipped away from us." With her casual tone she used when she wanted to change the subject, and I always complied. I conceded every single time because I trusted her, because she had never provided me with a reason not to, until Marcus became a frequent visitor, more than was acceptable. He always carried a laptop and sported that voracious glint in his eye, the one he wore when he detected a business prospect. I've witnessed him like that during pitch meetings, networking gatherings, even once at a poker table, when he sensed the man beside him was clueless about bluffing. Clara and Marcus had been associates in professional circles for some time, belonging to the same accelerator groups, having common investors, but I never fathomed their partnership would extend beyond the conference room or our apartment. One specific night stands out. Clara messaged, stating she was caught up in a last-minute meeting with a venture capital firm in South Loop. It was nearly 11 p.m., and I had already dined alone, cleared the dishes, and waited by the door for the sound of her keys jingling. However, I never heard them. The following morning, she walked in smelling of hotel shampoo and barely touched the coffee I prepared for her. "You look tired," she said. I nodded, suppressing the words that lingered at the back of my teeth. A week prior to our engagement dinner, the excuses proliferated. Marcus is aiding me in restructuring our pricing model. Marcus suggests our burn rate needs another perspective. Marcus believes we should take a risky approach for the keynote at Alphacon. Marcus, Marcus, Marcus. Suddenly, he seemed like her reflection. Meanwhile, I transformed into the figure brewing coffee in the backdrop as they constructed their empire without me. I tried to convince myself it was mere paranoia, an overactive mind, them simply pursuing a shared vision. Yet, something fundamental was slipping away. One night that week, I phoned Marcus late, after midnight, just to chat, to hear his voice and reassure myself of our bond. He didn't answer. 2 hours later, he texted, "Sorry, bro, slammed. Talk soon." The message felt like someone handing me an umbrella during a storm. The eve before our engagement dinner, everything fell apart. Clara disappeared, no messages, no calls, nothing. I went to the venue alone, hoping she'd appear, even if with an apology, and I wasn't sure how to accept it yet. But she never showed up. People asked polite inquiries. My mother gazed at me with a multitude of unspoken concerns in her eyes. I suggested that her predicament was an emergency, pertaining to work matters or something similar. I feigned a smile, shook hands, and even offered a toast all by myself. The following morning, I stumbled upon a LinkedIn post. There they stood, Clara and Marcus, arm in arm beneath a golden banner that read, "Tech Disruptor Gala." She wore the green silk dress she had saved for our honeymoon, while he donned a navy tuxedo, jokingly stating it made him look like a Wall Street executive. Their laughter echoed as they clinked glasses, their eyes sparkling with joy. The caption read, "When vision merges and love unfolds." They proudly announced the commencement of their new journey. Hash power couply off the hash startup sandal of my body turned to stone upon sight. Not the sturdy kind that endures stress, but the brittle type that shatters under duress. The kind that weighs heavily on one's chest, poisoning thoughts. I scrolled through the comments, each one carving a deeper wound. Ultimately, you two are invincible. A perfect match for an innovative paradise. I wasn't part of that narrative. I was merely an unnoticed footnote, a discarded draft in someone else's decisive presentation. Marcus abandoned me without a trace, plainly put. No remorse, no justification, he simply evaporated like a deleted message. As for Clara, she severed all connections with me within a day, as if I were the problem, as if I had been impeding her progress all along. I made one attempt to call her back, just once. She didn't answer. The beep of her voicemail echoed, and I found myself speaking her name into emptiness, followed by quietude. I wasn't certain what I sought from that conversation: closure, anger, and explanation, but all I received was the sound of my own breath. The kind of breath that whispers the end, whether you're ready for it or not. I skipped meals for 2 days, struggled to sleep for 5. All I did was gaze at the ceiling, the unmoving TV screen, my own image, and then something within me changed. On the sixth dawn, I confronted myself in the mirror. Not the man they abandoned. The man, having breath and pulse, faced a choice: wallow in betrayal or rise above it. Gathering essentials, I exited the apartment, for it was saturated with them. Memories of our near-constructed relationship lingered thickly within its walls, making them feel like accomplices. I couldn't dwell there. The kitchen retained her scent, and the bed seemed to align with them. So I sought refuge in a friend's spare room, slept on a futon, dined on chilled pizza, and for the first time in months, I began to sense a semblance of clarity. Sympathy was showered upon me. Pity offered as if it were candy. They said I didn't deserve that, but I wouldn't accept their sympathy or their animosity. What I craved was freedom, freedom from their headlines and labels. I longed to recollect who I was prior to their narratives and noise. I yearned to stop hearing Clara's laughter in my dreams and Marcus's voice resonating within me. I had to cease reliving the instance of our initial encounter and questioning if I had unintentionally given them a problem. Therefore, I erased the post and excluded them from my circle. Not out of malice, but for liberty. I wanted them expunged, not merely from my screens, but from my system, from my narrative. The downfall wasn't swift. It was gradual, similar to a structure with a decaying foundation. It groans, it sways, and then one day it crumbles silently. That was us. That was me. And I released it, piece by piece. Because if everything can be lost with a post and a photo opportunity, then it wasn't authentic to start with. And I deserved something genuine. I didn't shatter anything, didn't yell publicly, didn't call them at odd hours or drop by their workplace. The anger was there, brutal and painful, but it didn't erupt externally. It internalized, settled like embers in my core, and instead of letting it consume me completely, I let it mold something quieter, more precise. I departed from that apartment with an indifference born only after detachment sets in. I didn't wait for the expiration of the lease, as Clara had failed to update it. Thus, I contacted the landlord, returned the keys, and warned him about potential legal implications if anyone remained beyond a week. I left behind the furniture, the mattress, and the cherished framed print she adored. Even the air seemed polluted by an excess of memories of her morning laughter and her silent nights. All I retrieved were my clothes, books, and tools, the remnants of myself that remained untouched by them. I vividly recall the Uber journey to the airport. The driver, engaged in casual conversation, inquired about my destination. I deceived him, stating, "vacation." He smiled and nodded, likely picturing a journey towards something delightful. However, the reality was that I was fleeing from the ruins, from the abyss that had emerged at the core of my existence. Instead of the companions I anticipated by my 35th birthday, I was embarking on a disappearance rather than a holiday. No elaborate plan, just a ticket to a coastal town, some weeks of freedom following early completion of a contract job, and enough bitterness to fill a suitcase. Upon arriving at Harborview, a quaint coastal city adorned with cliffs that seemed sculpted by vengeful deities, I was a stranger without acquaintances. This isolation was deliberate. I secured a temporary lodging, a humble abode with squeaky floors and peeling wallpaper, offering views of the docks. The regular comings and goings of fishing vessels disregarded human dramas, providing an oblivious indifference that proved salvific. I maintained silence, kept to myself. I'd rise at dawn, jogging along the cliffside until my lungs ached, then return to hunt for jobs I held in contempt. Afternoons were spent at the local library, engrossed in case studies and business literature, annotating pages as I sought to reconstruct my mind from its foundations. People condemned me upon hearing the story, often remarking, "You must feel so betrayed." I'd acknowledge their sentiments. I allowed them to offer sympathy as if it were a prize. Yet, within me, I was already metamorphosing. I harbored a secret knowledge they lacked, the power to depart without looking back. That was my first victory. A pivotal moment, 2 months in, altered everything. Standing on the dock, I observed a team unloading metal crates, industrial materials for the new shipping yard expansion. The foreman, a man named Ellis, was berating a young worker struggling with a pulley system. Intrigued not by concern, but by the discomfort of watching mechanical misalignments, I intervened, demonstrating an improved method to the youth, detailing the balance point and torque resistance. Ellis witnessed my intervention. Then he questioned, "Are you seeking employment?" It commenced modestly, a part-time position offering consultancy on loading designs. Subsequently, I found myself immersed in the industrial design phase for novel warehouse configurations. This transitioned into contractual work with Harborview Logistics, causing a transformation in my previously introverted persona. I was no longer the individual concealed behind coffee mugs and chilly evasions. Instead, I was constructing once more. It wasn't only about blueprints and specifications, but also about building myself up. My diet improved, sleep became restful. I severed connections with those who knew me solely as Clara's fiancé. I ceased monitoring their social media feeds, stopped pondering Marcus's involvement in my past life. It wasn't my life anymore, and the quicker I acknowledged that, the more space I had to fashion a superior replacement. That's when the concept for clay and field emerged. It materialized during a storm. A savage coastal gale toppled an antiquated cargo hangar we'd been reinforcing. That evening, I drafted a more adaptable support system, one that could bend with the wind instead of opposing it. This sketch evolved into a prototype, then a proposal, then financial backing. In less than a year, I had collaborators silent, ingenious technicians and planners who disregarded media attention or startup turmoil. Their focus was on purpose, precision, and problem solving. Word trickled back home. "He's at Harborview now. Didn't he establish a firm? I heard he's dealing with international projects." Yet, I ignored their calls, skipped weddings and reunions. I had no desire to remain the subject of gossip or competition. I was constructing something untouchable by them, a life marked only by my own fingerprints. And that was the triumph departing, restarting, not ostentatiously, not to make a statement, but because it was the sole route that allowed me to breathe again. People assume revenge is about spectacular comebacks or sensational revelations. True power, true tranquility, it's choosing a different path and never looking back. I didn't depart Harborview to wander aimlessly. I left in search of a self that existed before them before Clara's ambition overshadowed her affection. Prior to Marcus opting for opportunity over loyalty, he wasn't naive or bitter. Instead, he was incomplete. Leaving was the initial move towards his completion. When I recount this chapter of my tale, I don't discuss heartbreak. Instead, I focus on choice, the decision to withdraw peacefully, to disengage, and to forego seeking explanations from those who had already made their choices clear. I opted for tranquility over drama. I chose solitude over destruction. From that serene environment, I constructed something indomitable. It said that one is first after a loss is survival. However, my journey was not merely surviving. It was reclaiming myself, wholeheartedly and without apologies, sans their approval. Harborview served as more than a hiding spot. It became the location where I reconstructed myself, piece by piece. In the morning's first light, before the fog withdrew from the bluffs, I would jog the same route, tracing a circuit that meandered through the cliffs and looped back past the industrial yards. The briny air, the calls of seagulls, the repetitive surge of waves, they all melded into my own rhythm, healing me where Clara and Marcus had torn me apart. I secured a position for conducting structural analysis at a mid-sized logistics firm situated in an aged naval warehouse. The work was unglamorous, often disregarded by tech elites. Yet it was genuine. I needed to restore my reputation, not through grandiose concepts, but with persistence. Silently, I persevered. I rectified faulty blueprints, revised outdated safety procedures, and suggested innovative materials that lowered expenses while boosting durability. No longer did I don formal attire. Instead, I wore boots, a sleeved shirt rolled up, grease-smeared hands, and a clear mind. It was tangible, it was true, and it reminded me of something I hadn't experienced in years. Meaning without artifice. Evenings were spent differently. At first, I studied to divert myself. Studying business law, global regulations, modular designs, and other endeavors kept my hands occupied and distracted me from the past. However, this study transformed into something more profound. I was constructing a base for something greater than contracts and shipping routes. My notebooks brimmed with sketches and ideas for eco-friendly housing, modular workspaces, portable facilities tailored for high-risk regions. My objective wasn't merely profit but resilience, for individuals rebuilding their lives just as I was. 3 years after departing Chicago, I initiated Clay and Field. The name originated from a metaphor that resonated during my morning jogs. Clay, flexible and capable of assuming any shape with purpose. Field, open, grounded, with hidden potential. Clay and Field emerged from these concepts to mend what's damaged and cultivate what can thrive. Initially, it was a modest consulting firm consisting of me and two colleagues from the legal documents, Ellis and Marin. Two exceptional individuals, neither boasting inflated resumes nor burdened by arrogance. In a cramped office above a bakery that exuded the aroma of cinnamon and aged wood, we toiled. The floors squeaked underfoot, and the Wi-Fi was strained during rainy days. However, our passion filled this modest space. We crafted designs robust enough to withstand hurricanes and conflict zones. We didn't court investors in tailored suits. Instead, we presented our ideas to nonprofits, local administrations, and aid organizations. Our aim wasn't to become the next tech sensation. Rather, we were endeavoring to construct items that could endure when the world fell apart. Initially, people failed to comprehend us. A person from my past once inquired about my millionaire before 30 trajectory. Why are you designing mobile clinics and flood-prone areas? I didn't reply, not because I lacked an explanation, but because they wouldn't fathom it. Prosperity devoid of purpose had nearly shattered me. Now I was constructing purpose, and the prosperity was catching up, albeit gradually. The company stealthily expanded, first to San Diego, then Dakar, and eventually Lisbon. It wasn't my pursuit of opportunity that drove this growth, but our ability to solve genuine issues. Once again, my phone began to ring. Individuals from the old industry, venture capitalists, startup journalists, even Clara's former assistant started contacting me. Requests for quotes, interviews, podcast appearances followed. I declined most of these offers. I wasn't constructing for acclaim. I was building as a means of anchoring myself. Each blueprint, every screw, every rivet in the modular shelters we shipped to Indonesia served as a reminder that I had transformed what they thought was my end into a new beginning. Starting anew has its lessons. The quietness taught me how to exist without constant validation and how to relinquish resentment. Not because they deserved forgiveness, but because I desired tranquility. Their names no longer provoked me. I no longer dwelled on what I could have done differently. If Clara had been taken, she wasn't truly mine, and if Marcus betrayed me for a chance at prestige, he hadn't genuinely been my friend. One night in Portugal, following a site visit, I found myself standing lonely on a rooftop overlooking the city as lights below gleamed softly and scattered. My mind was not on Clara nor Marcus. Instead, it dwelt on a boy from Aleppo who would sleep in a structure I helped create. This weatherproof, fire-resistant pod could be erected in less than 3 hours. It was then that I understood I had fashioned something indestructible, something independent of my past identity, something entirely mine. Over time, clay and field evolved beyond a business. It transformed into a crusade. We taught refugees to construct their dwellings. We employed locals. We shunned inflated salaries and hollow titles. Our board consisted not of influencers, but problem solvers. We never claimed to be saviors. We were merely constructors, steady and tenacious. A certain power lies in creating something tangible with one's own labor, not software or theories, but something that can be felt, inhabited, endured. This strength defined my identity. I didn't require writing essays about my return or posting motivational pictures. My work was my statement. Later, out of curiosity, when I searched for Clara online, I saw their faces once more. They were speaking at a conference in Dubai, grinning broadly on stage. Their bios overflowed with achievements and self-praise. I felt nothing, not bitterness, not envy, merely detachment. It was like looking at a picture of strangers who had passed me by in an airport. For what I possess now, they could never attain it, couldn't purchase it, couldn't feign it. What I built with my bare hands didn't just transform my career, it transformed me, and that was the most potent thing of all. I encountered Sienna at an event I nearly skipped. Fresh from a grueling 3-week project in Cape Verde, constructing modular classrooms on terrain as unsteady as sandy steel, I was fatigued, both physically and mentally. Desiring tranquility, I considered a prolonged rest and a glass of Malbec on my hotel balcony. However, Ellis had persisted, urging me to attend the fundraiser. "You've been wearing those boots for days," he said. "Slip into a blazer, remind yourself you're still a person." Reluctantly, I obliged. The setting was Lisbon, an exclusive fundraiser nestled within a villa centuries old, filled with the scents of orange blossoms and aged wood. A place where champagne replenished itself and hors d'oeuvres were artfully displayed as if in museum cases. I exchanged greetings with a few hands, acknowledged familiar names whispered in economic development circles, and maintained a low profile near the rear. Spectacle no longer suited me. I was the man who crafted structures in silence, rather than the one boasting about impact figures to all ears. Then I heard her voice, not boisterous or commanding, simply distinct and unwavering. It sliced through the clamor like the first gust after a tempest. She was addressing a compact group of men who seemed to be there out of obligation for donation. Innovation isn't the problem, she argued, it's implementation. We possess technology that could tackle housing crises tenfold. What we lack is the framework to deploy it where it counts. Refugee camps aren't in need of intelligent homes. They require intelligent logistics. I glanced over, and there she was, Dr. Sienna Moro. I had studied her papers, watched her speeches from afar like an admirer who never imagined encountering the actual person. Nigerian-American, economist, strategist, a mind that didn't merely identify global challenges, but solved them with surgical precision. There she stood, standing mere feet from the shrimp platter, undermining years of bureaucratic pomposity with cold facts alone. I held back until everyone left, entered without proposition or flattery, but with a query. If red tape didn't exist, what would you construct? Her gaze lingered for a brief instant, as if evaluating not just my words, but the purpose hidden within. Then she grinned, revealing plans of shelters that adapt, schools that unfurl, and systems capable of enduring strain. "Homes that outlive turmoil," I responded. We dialogued for 2 hours. The meal altered, the music transitioned, and the evening sky darkened to violet. Remaining by the balcony, we conversed not to impress, but to share thoughts. She expressed no fascination for finance. She showed no enchantment with statistics or market percentages. Instead, she inquired about design principles, about honor and homelessness, about creating a space that instills hope rather than confinement. I shared with her tales of clay and fields, harbor view, departing from a world I believed was mine, and finding a superior peace in stillness. In the night's conclusion, she gave me her business card, a simple, unassuming act of trust. She spoke of a proposal then, a unproject for development zones focusing on communities first. She suggested that I might assist in its construction. Our encounter repeated itself 2 days later, this time within her Geneva office, a Spartan room brimming with books, maps, and one black and white image of her deceased father, a scholar who championed land ownership rights in West Africa. Sienna wasn't merely intelligent, she was motivated by heritage. She bore it like a shield, but never employed it to safeguard herself from the world. Instead, she plunged into turmoil, prepared herself, and began mending it. By our second meeting's midpoint, I had already decided I wished her in my life. In contrast to Clara, Sienna differed significantly in every imaginable aspect. While Clara craved visibility, Sienna sought understanding. Instead of exerting power to dominate a space, Sienna employed transparency to welcome others. With Clara, I constantly felt behind. But with Sienna, I found tranquility, not stagnation, but a sense of rootedness. Our partnership originated from a single project, a sustainable housing initiative for displaced communities in northern Mali. However, it extended beyond that. Regular calls escalated to daily conversations. Meetings morphed into shared meals. By the time we initiated Phase 2, I was shuttling between Lisbon and Geneva as if I were drawn magnetically towards her. Initially, it wasn't about love. It was about respect, admiration, a force I hadn't anticipated, yet couldn't dismiss. We shared our first kiss under a damaged lantern outside a construction site in Ghana, when the rest of the team had retired for the night and the power was out. Reviewing survey findings by torchlight, she glanced up, smiled at something I said, and the tranquility between us altered subtly. It wasn't staged, it wasn't theatrical, it was soft. And it was sincere. A year passed, and we were quietly married in Morocco, in a place called Essaouira, nestled between the sea and sky. No photographers, no influencers. Just us, a few close friends, and a pledge etched into simplicity. She donned a white linen gown. I wore the same blazer from the night we first met. We recited our vows at dawn on the rooftop of a riad, with wind as our sole witness. Our lives intertwined as if destined to be one. We embarked on the Stillwater Project, a think tank focusing on community-driven reconstruction strategies. Our mission extended beyond designing buildings. It aimed to restore autonomy. We collaborated with local leaders. We listened more than we spoke. And together, we brought about change that didn't require attention. It simply needed roots. Eventually, the secret was revealed. My past was rehashed as a tale of redemption by certain headlines, such as "Man Abandoned Turns Globetrotter" or similar drivel. I disregarded it, just like she did. Our narrative wasn't about retribution, it was about resonance. Clara and Marcus ceased to occupy my thoughts. They became mere white noise, a faint echo from another existence. I moved beyond the wavelength they inhabited. With Sienna, I was not merely healed, but transformed. The world we were crafting together wasn't reactive. It was revolutionary. I constructed my company from the ruins of deceit. But with Sienna, I created something more potent, a life devoid of spectral presences. Only light, only inheritance, only progression. We exchanged vows in Morocco under a sunset sky that seemed infinite. There were no drones, no media coverage, no hidden brand endorsements camouflaged within bouquets. Just us. A small group of friends, and raw, authentic purpose. In a breathable linen suit that allowed for perspiration without remorse, I stood there. Sienna ambled along a sandstone path, her white dress billowing with the wind, much like a soft whisper. The air was filled only with the distant echo of crashing waves and the gentle thud of her footsteps. As we exchanged our vows, neither of us dwelt on the past, not Clara, not Marcus. They had become wisps of smoke, shadows behind closed doors I'd left behind. All that mattered was the woman before me, sharp, compassionate, boundless. After the ceremony, rather than succumbing to the haze of post-wedding indulgence, Sienna and I took action. The foundation of our project, the Stillwater Initiative, was first conceived on a napkin during our layover in Madrid. To repair what's fractured in conflict zones, she insisted, tapping her pen. We can no longer design as colonizers. We need architecture that prioritizes people education and shelter intertwined. Dignity, not dependency, resonated within me, sparking images of the initial project. I contemplated, could dwellings double as learning facilities during daytime and shelters at night? She smiled approvingly. That was indeed our essence, Maria Forgers, an amalgamation of resilience and compassion. Our objective was to reconstruct the fragments of war-ravaged territories, creating infrastructure that did more than stand. It taught, healed, and progressed. We collaborated with communities in Syria, Mali, and northern Colombia. We employed local masons and engineers, tutored displaced adolescents in 3D design software, and designed mobile educational units adaptable to shifting camps. It wasn't glamorous. We eschewed TED Talks and flashy websites brimming with buzzwords. Instead, we were immersed, in the thick of it mud, blueprints, and our hearts deeply invested in the work. Oddly, I seemed to have forgotten the sensation of heartache. I seemed to have lost touch with the length to which I had once gauged my self-worth by someone else's standards. The painful memories of Marcus' treachery and Claire's silence dissipated like nightmares, no longer repeated. Instead, a contented tranquility settled over me, particularly when a village leader shook my hand or when Sienna and I stood amidst children in a school we had built together. Often, we found ourselves engrossed late into the evening with maps, numbers, and translations of local dialects, debating the pros and cons of corrugated steel versus compressed clay bricks. She'd jot equations on my arm when the notepad ran out of space. I'd brew tea just as she liked it, peppermint with a hint of ginger. We were more than business partners. We were in sync. When Sienna dozed off on the couch, I would drape the woven blanket we bought in Esuera over her. The one she claimed felt like patchwork and fabric. The best part was that there was no need for false displays between us. I had no need to prove my recovery, nor did Sienna have to demonstrate hers. She had no need to feign admiration for titles or relationships. Instead, we subtly supported each other. I repaired her laptop when its keys jammed, while she scrutinized my contracts when I harbored doubts. Our actions were unassuming. There was no tally, only a continuous flow of trust and vitality. This form of love does not flare up, it stabilizes. However, tranquility often succumbs to interruptions. It was during the early spring at a Geneva summit that I chanced upon his name on the agenda. Marcus Dane, founder of Capital Craft Ventures, topic, Scaled Innovation via Disruption. The thought of laughing crossed my mind. The very disruption he employed to sabotage my prospects now earned him a keynote slot. His bio was filled with hollow jargon and self-congratulatory drivel. Yet, there was Clara Vance, CTO of Claritech Solutions, listed beside his name. I gazed at it for some time, seeing a warped reflection, distant and strangely disconnected. I closed the document without divulging this to Sienna. Initially, it seemed unimportant. However, a few weeks later, an invitation materialized, one of those lavish, high-profile galas where tech leaders feigned global salvation while sipping expensive cocktails, pricier than some people's monthly earnings. We were both invited to speak, Sienna as the closing keynote and me on resilient design strategies as a panelist. Unforeseen waves of influence had swept over Stillwater. I hesitated. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" I queried her. She gave a soft, reassuring smile, touching my collar. "Won't they be there?" I affirmed. Undeterred by fear or recognition, she remained composed. "Then let's go remind them of who we have become." On the night of the gala, I observed Sienna moving through the room with an effortless elegance. She wore a midnight blue gown, her hair swept back, her expression a harmonious blend of intellect and kindness. The crowd made way for her, not out of dread or celebrity, but out of reverence. By her side in a custom-tailored black suit, I was no longer the man who had been deserted. I was a craftsman. A partner, regarded as visionary by multiple media portrayals. Yet, within that gathering, I was merely a companion. I sought neither Clara nor Marcus. The past had a knack for making its presence known. With Sienna holding my hand firmly near the grand entrance, I suddenly felt them Clara in a golden sequined gown, still graceful but diminished in my recollection. Marcus, sporting gray in his beard and an overly broad grin. His gaze appraised me as if I were a test he'd already aced. He strutted over, drink in hand, exuding the self-assurance of someone who had never mastered the art of reading a room. "Ah," he said mockingly, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Never thought I'd find you here. Thought you were off, constructing tents in the desert, perhaps." He chuckled at his own wit. Clara remained quiet. I remained unmoved. I turned to Sienna, gave her hand a squeeze, and said, "My dear, this is Marcus and Clara, an old friend and former fiancé." She extended her hand warmly, introducing herself as Dr. Sienna Morrow, Director of Global Innovation at UN, founder of Stillwater, and her husband. I observed their expressions change. A faltering smile from Marcus, a momentary gasp from Clara. For the first time in years, I saw them not as adversaries in my narrative, but as individuals who ceased to evolve upon taking the shortcut. We didn't boast, we didn't clarify, and there was no need. We had ignited a fire, not one of vengeance, but one that offered warmth, resilience, and guidance for the future. All they could do was watch it burn, beautiful, distant, and completely out of their grasp. Our arrival at the gala was marked by an understated elegance, neither ostentatious nor flashy, simply deliberate. Sienna's gown billowed like liquid ink under moonlight, her composure rooted in silent assurance. I donned a timeless black suit, not aiming to prove anything, but to show I hadn't shattered by the years I had been absent from their gaze. Upon entering the grand atrium of the gathering, a lofty hall bathed in gentle amber light and crystal reflections, I surveyed the room swiftly, identifying the familiar faces. Investors huddled in hushed clusters, innovators donning costly grins, former acquaintances feigning ignorance. Then, there he was, Marcus. I recognized him before he noticed me, his back slightly turned as he guffawed excessively within a crowd that probably no longer remembered the art of constructing anything with their hands. The scene remained largely unaltered, the same luxury attire hinting at his youth, the same timepiece he once flaunted during our poker games adorning his wrist, the same arrogant smirk. And holding on to him like an accessory was Clara. Her stance was impeccable, shoulders straightened, a flute of champagne delicately suspended between two refined digits. However, her smile felt empty, detached, almost robotic. Her gaze roved the room with a hint of discomfort that didn't suit her. Clara's hand touched mine gently, the gold of her bangle brushing against my sleeve. I remained composed, unfazed, merely gestured towards them. "There they are," I murmured. She glanced briefly, just long enough for recognition, then returned her gaze to me. "Let them observe," she stated simply. A few minutes later, we were drawn into a dialogue by a professional associate, someone I admired, no nonsense, modest, outcome-oriented. As we conversed, I noticed movement from the periphery. This was making its way towards us alone. He moved with the stride of someone accustomed to being welcomed, to having his voice command attention merely by occupying a space. Upon stopping in front of us, I saw it. The hesitation. It flickered for just a moment, but it was present. "Adler," he stated, offering a hand as if we were reunited long-lost brothers at a social gathering. "I didn't anticipate your presence. You've been rather silent." "Engaged," I replied, matching the firmness of our handshake with the appropriate level of respect. "That usually keeps me occupied." He chuckled uneasily, seeming to measure the ambience around us. Then his gaze shifted toward Sienna. "And this must be her," was all he managed before Sienna gracefully moved forward, exuding an air that made every introduction feel sacred. "Dr. Sienna Morrow, UN's Global Innovation Director, and her husband," she introduced herself. The atmosphere noticeably changed. Marcus blinked in surprise, realization dawning on his face like a gradual sunrise. He was unaware, hadn't known, until that moment, until she spoke the truth. You could almost hear mental gears whirring as headlines, LinkedIn posts, and speaking engagements merged into one coherent picture in his mind. And there it was. The expression, that shattered gleam in his eyes. He had just acknowledged that the man he assumed was left behind had transformed into an unreachable figure. Clara arrived promptly, her heels echoing against the marble floor like punctuation on an unsaid sentence. They spotted me. Then came Sienna, momentarily frozen before her social mask returned. Polished, perfected, as thin as paper. "Ah," Clara said, voice tense, "seems the world is smaller when you construct it yourself." I responded nonchalantly. Sienna made no effort to conceal her smirk. Marcus struggled to regain his composure. Continuing with architecture and fieldwork, I noticed an article about you in Tech Human last year. Combining clay and field, correct? He attempted to pronounce the name as if it was foreign, as if he hadn't scoured every article trying to find any mention of me. "Desiring you still," I said. "We construct for endurance, not acclaim." Clara raised her glass, the light reflecting off her large, cold, sharp ring. "It appears you've advanced in your position." Sienna looked at her, smiling softly. He hadn't advanced. He was in the same place. They continued on, and that was all there was. No strike, no dispute, no explosion of emotions. Instead, a tranquil, indelible moment where the truth stood exposed in the space between us. Marcus possessed wealth, Clara radiated glamour. Yet, we held on to something priceless, a genuine future. Not founded on illusion, but built on substance. Moments later, we were summoned away. Sienna was about to deliver her keynote address, and I had an imminent panel discussion to prepare for. As we headed towards the main hall, I stole one last look back. Marcus remained watching, while Clara's gaze followed us as we departed. For the first time since their absence from my life, they seemed like those left behind. Backstage, Sienna fine-tuned her mic on her collar. Observing her, outlined against stage lighting, I suddenly comprehended something profound. I wasn't standing beside a woman to make a statement. I was standing beside someone I esteemed, revered, cherished, and I didn't require vengeance to arrive at this place. I opted to carry on constructing. Her oration was powerful without needing to raise her voice. She discussed innovation and humankind, about creating structures that respected those who would inhabit them, about legacy. From the sidelines, I observed not as a husband yearning for recognition, but as a man in admiration of the woman by my side. Upon completion of her speech, the room resounded with applause, prolonged, heartfelt. As the illumination changed and the subsequent part of the event transpired, I spotted Marcus once more, maintaining his position, continuing to clap, but this time slower, contemplative. Not because he was proud, but because he had finally comprehended. He attempted to triumph in a game that I ceased participating in years ago. He chose temporary victory, glamour, prestige, ease. And I chose quietude. I chose construction. I chose authenticity. In that moment, enveloped by applause not my own, I recognized something more profound. I didn't require their validation. I didn't require their regret, since nothing they could utter or enact would modify the facts I knew to be true. My life was so robust, purposeful, and elusive to them that their presence couldn't destabilize it. And that was everything. I didn't flinch when Marcus hurled his self-satisfied jibe my way. Not when Clara's expression transitioned from astonishment to comprehension, nor when I politely introduced Sienna as "Love, meet Marcus and Clara, my old friend and former fiancé." The expression on Clara's face was invaluable, her jaw slightly agape, one brow twitching uncertainly between feigning delight and retreating. Contrary to Clara, Marcus sported a smirk brimming with presumptions. He had spoken as if he were still participating in the same game. Status, ego, the shallow joy of outdoing each other. "Alas, you," he said, insinuating I was still solitary while basking in opulence. Such comments are typically made by those convinced they have already prevailed. Sienna extended her hand before another word could be spoken, elegance apparent in every gesture. "I am Dr. Sienna Morrow," she stated, flashing a smile that seemed to fall short of reaching her eyes. "Director of Global Innovation at the United Nations." She then added casually, without any hint of bitterness, "And I am Marcus's wife." At this point, everything on Marcus's face shifted. I watched as various emotions flickered across it like static on a failing television recognition, shock, something more ominous perhaps. Fear or panic might have been the correct terms, though embarrassment could also be inferred. Whatever it was, it hit him swiftly and powerfully, as if someone had revealed a name he should have known all along, realizing that he'd overlooked something significant. Clara remained frozen, her champagne glass suspended mid-air in her right hand, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the stem. She stared at Sienna as though she'd glimpsed a specter, but not one that tormented maliciously, rather, one that reminded her of how much further she still had to go. Are you? The keynote speaker, Marcus managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. Regarding the summit, Sienna subtly nodded, maintaining an unforced demeanor. Closing speaker. I will be discussing cross-continental strategies for sustainable reconstruction and post-conflict economic policies. Turning to me, she smiled. Following that, we'll be revealing the third extension of Stillwater's Refugee Innovation Hub program. Clay and Field recently finalized the prototype design last month. I remained silent. There was no need. Marcus' expression crumbled into something significantly less confident than the man who had just moments ago deemed me poor. Impressive, Clara eventually said, attempting a casual tone. Small world. I tilted my head. Not particularly. We merely kept moving. I could sense the crack in Marcus' ego, initially slight, then growing wider. He had assumed dominance. An easy situation. Perhaps even a scene for a drama he believed he was still orchestrating. But now he stood before the woman Forbes referred to as the most powerful voice in global economics. And she wasn't just present, she was here. She was my partner, my wife. Her presence reshaped the concept of power. I assume his discomfort stemmed from the absence of vengeance in my gaze, the lack of triumphant smirk, and the absence of mocking laughter. I hadn't come to compete. That's what unnerved him, as it signified that I had already triumphed without trying. I had stepped off the board and created a new game. Sienna, with her warm smile but piercing eyes, made them look. Well, Sienna said, her voice calm yet intentional. She was well aware of her actions. Holding the mirror firmly, Clara glanced at Marcus, the tension between them becoming tangible now. The kind of tension born not out of love, but from a hastily constructed house using substandard materials. A structure that crumbles under pressure. Well, Marcus hesitated, obviously seeking an escape route that didn't scream surrender. We'll cross paths again. Sienna and I turned back towards the ballroom, our shoulders brushing gently as we walked. Our hands intertwined, our fingers fitting together effortlessly as we navigated through a group of attendees, past hushed conversations and curious gazes. There was no need for words between us for a while. Our silence spoke volumes. It wasn't until we reached the corridor outside the main room that she leaned in slightly and commented, "That was more fulfilling than I anticipated." I responded with a soft, comforting chuckle. "You didn't even work up a sweat." She gently squeezed my hand. They underestimated the person they believed they knew. They didn't witness the one I wed. I paused, allowing her words to sink in. She was correct. They continued to perceive me as the man with a fractured engagement, the one swallowed by the gloom of heartache. They hadn't taken the time to learn about my transformation following their toast to treachery. They remained unaware of the nights I spent sketching blueprints under the soft glow of a lamp. The mornings when I ran until my lungs ached, merely to drown out the din in my mind. They didn't spot the architect who constructed resilient structures to withstand war, relocation, and environmental destruction. The man who transformed transient shelters into enduring sanctuaries. The man Sienna selected. Back within the hall, the lights decreased slightly as the subsequent speaker stepped onto the stage. We found our seats in proximity to the front, where a modest brass sign carried Sienna's name. People acknowledged us as we moved through. Some whispered compliments, others just exchanged acknowledging glances, reserved for those who no longer feel the need to prove themselves. I didn't glance at Marcus and Clara again that night. I didn't require it. I was aware of their positions. I knew the unspoken tension between them, the shattered remnants of unfulfilled expectations. Later, as Sienna and I stood outside waiting for our car, she leaned on me, the cool night air enveloping us like a question already answered. "What do you believe he noticed?" she inquired softly. "His reflection," I replied, "and mine." The vehicle stopped. The chauffeur exited to hold the door open. I directed her inside, accompanied her, and as we departed, I gazed out the window instead of confirming if they were observing, but to experience the city lights glide over me as a baptism. This incident wasn't about retribution. It was about recovery. And to my perspective, Marcus and Clara had just observed something more agonizing than retaliation. The man they abandoned hadn't merely endured, I had transformed. It is said that the loudest message is delivered when silence is anticipated. On that night, I didn't respond to their anticipation. I didn't escalate or attempt to settle a score. Instead, I stood by my wife and witnessed Marcus struggle with a burden of truth, allowing the silence to perform what years of discourses had never achieved. That instant wasn't founded on retribution, it was established on evidence. Evidence that I had evolved into a life rendering their treachery insignificant. My accomplishment wasn't founded on their downfall, rather it was their accomplishments that shrank in my presence. As Sienna ascended the stage for her keynote address, I occupied the front row, not merely as a spouse, but as a man familiar with the landscape she elucidated. War-ravaged areas transformed into residential neighborhoods. Shattered economies restored through careful planning. Homes that served more than just shelter, they embodied dignity. Her words permeated the room like beams of light. Powerful, measured, indisputable. She spoke without seeking validation because her work was already grounded in reality, where figures represented names, families, and futures. Each time she discussed housing systems or referred to our refugee prototype model, I could feel it. Not pride, not vanity, just awareness. I was there, and they had to confront that fact. When the thunderous applause ensued, I didn't look for Marcus or Clara, but I sensed their gaze, weighty, unconvinced, still questioning. After Sienna departed the stage and the audience dispersed towards the reception area once more, I spotted Marcus on the outskirts, standing stiffly, arms crossed, seeming to root himself in defiance. Clara, by his side, offered polite applause with an ambiguous expression. They resembled unwelcome guests at a wedding, uncertain of their seating arrangement. Backstage, I found Sienna with a glass of water. She radiated not from self-importance or admiration, but from a sense of harmony, a feeling of fulfilling her purpose. "You were magnificent," I remarked, passing her the glass. She returned a smile. They had listened, even those who hadn't wished to. We spent a brief while together before returning to the main hall. The music transitioned, its volume reduced, replaced by softer, ambient tunes as chatter filled the air and glasses chimed. Gradually, individuals approached us, one after another. Some expressed genuine interest in getting to know us. Others attempted networking. A few offered compliments concealed within suggestions, disguising business pitches beneath praise. With practiced grace, we maneuvered through it all, giving pause to those who appreciated and brushing past those who didn't. Then Clara re-emerged. She strode towards us with measured steps, as if approaching the verge of a truth long forgotten. Her attire, pristine earlier, now seemed like fortification. She halted a few feet away, clinging to her purse in both hands, unsure of what to do with it. "I owe you an apology," she declared, her gaze darting between us but never settling. I remained still, not due to cruelty, but to listen to her genuine feelings instead of rehearsed words. "I was dishonest with you then," she admitted, "and I didn't muster the courage to confront what I had done, not even after everything that transpired. Witnessing you now, learning about your accomplishments, I interrupted her with a gentle wave of my hand. "Clara," I murmured softly, "you don't owe me anything anymore." This surprised her evidently. Her desire to revise the past, since she was no longer subordinate to me, was evident. However, the past was irreversible. It had left its imprint. It didn't require her alterations. "You chose," I stated, "and so did I. The distinction is, my choice wasn't intended to harm you. My choice aimed at rebuilding myself." She nodded slowly, lips pursed together. "Marcus," he mused, "you'd vanish." I had indeed, but not in the way he wished. Sienna advanced then, not as a defense, but as a presence. Calm, composed, she remained silent. Her silence served both as protection and reflection. Clara gulped. She's remarkable. She is, I concurred, without hesitation. There was no need for further words. Clara didn't seek comfort in a hug. She didn't weep. She simply stood there, perhaps for the first time recognizing that her role in my tale had become passive. She wasn't the heartache. She wasn't the moral. She wasn't even the adversary. She was merely a chapter I'd outgrown. As she departed, no bitterness trailed in her footsteps, only stillness. In the night's latter hours, Sienna and I left the venue, stealing a final look at Marcus. He stood solitary at the marble staircase's edge, peering into the throng but seeing little. His tie hung loose. His countenance sagged. He seemed a man who had finally grasped the whole image, yet arrived too late to alter the border. The car doors sealed out the gala's din as we departed. Sienna rested her head on my shoulder, the city lights flickering on the windshield like remnants of all the self-versions I'd abandoned. She expressed regret, a statement more than a query. I nodded in response. She had, but did it alter anything? I turned slightly, pressing a kiss to her hairline. No, because she apologized to the man I once was, and I am not him anymore. The rest of the journey was quiet, requiring no additional dialogue, no unraveling. Just us side by side, heart to heart, spirit to spirit. And in the distance, Marcus and Clara remained amidst the remnants of a tale they tried to weave from mine. Yet, this narrative was never theirs to complete. It was mine, and it was merely commencing. The morning following the gala, we journeyed together on the coastal road outside Lisbon, with the sun ascending in shards across the water. Sienna's hand felt warm within mine, her fingers entwined with a sense of tranquil conviction. There were no more orations to deliver, no more formal attire to don. Only us, the endless road, and the whisper of potential echoing between us like the wind coursing through the foliage. She glanced at me, her expression tender. "You've been silent." I responded with a smile. "I am contemplating." "Concerning them," I clarified. "No," I explained, meaning every word. "Regarding how wonderful this feels." She acknowledged with a nod, leaning her head against the seat, the sunlight slicing across her face. "Isn't it peculiar?" She mused. "Yes," I agreed, sharing in the sentiment. "Occasionally, the individuals who cause us the greatest pain can pave the way for our most significant advancements." In the quiet moments, Clara and Marcus were my anchor. My world spun around their actions, emotions, and possessions. But as time passed, following the silence, reconstruction, and healing, I perceived it differently. They didn't merely hurt me, they liberated me. They freed me from a self-loathing that accepted less than I deserved. If they hadn't deceived me, I could have married Clara, could have built a life filled with superficial breezes and hollow acclaim, could have dwelled in spaces where I was half acknowledged, where love was a performance and loyalty was bartered. However, I discovered authenticity instead. A real person, Sienna. She didn't just adore me, she admired me. She pushed me. She recognized the man I was and the man I could become, and never once asked me to diminish. And in exchange, I offered her everything I didn't know I still had to give. At a tiny scenic spot where the cliffs plunged steeply into the ocean, she exited first, with the wind nudging at her jacket's edge. Afterward, I joined, entering the gust that carried the scent of salt and sunshine. For some time, we remained silent, simply observing the waves colliding with rocks, observing seagulls plummeting and ascending. Then I voiced what had been growing inside me since the gala. I felt compelled to lay eyes on them again, not for closure, but to gauge my progress. She looked at me, her face initially indecipherable, then serene. "You required seeing they didn't break you." I nodded. They were oblivious to where I began. We shifted to a nearby bench, and I retrieved something from my coat pocket. The action wasn't planned, but an instinct propelled me to carry it. A letter, brief, consisting of 3 lines. From Marcus. "Did you win, brother?" That was all it said. No remorse, no rationale, just that. A confession concealed as a capitulation. I handed it to Sienna. She looked over it once, then twice, afterwards neatly refolding it and pushing it back towards me. "What will your response be?" she inquired. "Nothing," I replied, for I wasn't competing to win. It wasn't about seeking revenge or craving approval or settling long-standing accounts. Rather, I was constructing a life that they could never afford, not even with all their jewels. As the ocean roared beneath and the heavens expanded overhead, I shut my eyes, surrendering to the wind that swept everything away: the past, the identities, the burden. I was liberated. But more than that, I was complete.